Hey, my name is Matt Stohrer and I repair saxophones for a living. Today I would like to talk to you about one of my favorite saxophones, the King Zephyr Special. The Zephyr Special was a saxophone that was made between 1937 and 1945, but really it's more like 1942 because musical instrument production in the US almost stopped completely between 1942 and late 1945, early 1946 because of the war, World War II. Much of what saxophones are made out of, leather, felt, brass, steel, was all extremely important war material. So production of that sort of stuff stopped, with the exception of instruments made mostly for military bands or if they somehow obtained an exception to the order, because it was actually a federal law. And most of the musical instrument companies in the US started making stuff for the war. Like, for instance, Kahn made altimeters. Not sure what King made. So this is the Zephyr Special, and this is basically the father to the King Super 20, which is the King saxophone most people think of when they hear the King name. But according to me, anyways, I think that the Zephyr Special is actually the best saxophone that King made. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like Super 20s. I do. But I think if you get to play a Zephyr Special, you may see why I say what I say. They're just really kind of the best of both worlds. They have fantastic craftsmanship. They're very easy to get around. Intonation is very good. The tone is rich, full, and lush. There's just a whole lot of tone there. Now, by the way, this alto I've not yet overhauled. I'm going to overhaul it, but that's why you see all sorts of dents and like old pads and stuff on it. And as a matter of fact, this is going to be my saxophone. I'm replacing my personal horn, which I've had for a while, which is a Selmer Balanced Action, which I used in my Selmer Balanced Action video. So if you're wondering how much I love these saxophones, there you go. Particularly in alto, I think the Zephyr Special, the Balanced Action, and the Kahn Transitional are my favorites. So anyways, this is the father of the Super 20, and as such, it has a sterling silver neck. It does not have a sterling silver bell, although I've heard tell that you could get maybe either prototypes or special orders of the Zephyr Special with the sterling bell. If you have one, I would love to see it, and I would even love more to work on it, so let me know. Now, these saxophones were made, as I said, between 1937 and 1945, mostly 42. The serial numbers you'll find are from about 200,000 to about 272,000. But it was made concurrently with the King Zephyr Special being the special version of the King Zephyr. And the King Zephyr was made from before the Zephyr Special was made until way after the Zephyr Special was made. And some of the Zephyrs are very similar. Mainly if you're looking at a Zephyr made in the 40s, late 30s through the 40s, you're looking at what is basically a very similar horn to the Zephyr Special, and dollar for dollar represents a very high value. Most people don't think of a King Zephyr when they think of a really great saxophone, but a particular serial range of the Zephyrs that have similar keywork to this are really, really fantastic saxophones. And the Zephyr Special is even better. Now, the Zephyr Special actually does differ from the Zephyr in several key areas. The first being the material and the bore of the neck, which is different from the normal Zephyr. If you look at advertising materials from the time, they say that the Zephyr Special is, the apotheosis of their effort at the saxophone. And it took 18 months of research to make these changes on the Zephyr to where they came up with a much better instrument. And the features that they talk about are the sterling silver neck, a larger bore from neck to bell, a different taper in the neck, harder alloy keys, although they may be talking about the nickel silver key barrels, which is a harder metal than brass, which on the plus side, when it's in really good shape, it doesn't wear as quickly, it doesn't get damaged as easily, it doesn't bend as easily. But if you're doing a full mechanical rebuild, like I did on this one, it means you're going to be taking a bit extra time, because mechanical rebuilds, the swedging of keys and so forth, is done by hand, which means if you're working on a harder metal, it's harder. It takes longer. But once you get it set up perfectly, as you can see there's no play in the keywork on this horn, it's going to stay this way for, given good care, 50 to 70 years. So I will never, no one should need to overhaul this saxophone again who is currently overhauling saxophones. I should be retired before this needs to get a mechanical rebuild again. So the harder alloy in the keys, a triple strap ring, which you still see on some modern saxophones. And the thing that's cool about this is depending on how tall you are and how far away the instrument is from you on your neck strap and how much weight you like to have on your thumb, by putting your neck strap in a different position, here's in the top, you can see how the saxophone lays. Here's in the bottom, you can see how the saxophone lays. You can adjust how the saxophone balances, which I find to be very handy. And it's also a super sturdy and nice thick strap ring, so it doesn't wear through as easily as the ones you see sometimes. They move the keys to the left hand, so you've got left hand bell keys. It makes it look like a modern saxophone. It has a leak-proof neck. This is a double socket neck, which is, rather than the double socketness of it making it leak-proof, because it's not leak-proof. It's just they made this much sturdier. You can see the thickness of the tenon here and the thickness of the body side tenon. They made it much sturdier than the instruments that came before this one, so it's much less likely to get damaged or worn and leak. This instrument, I didn't need to do any work on this neck tenon joint to make it seal, which is really great because most of the time when I'm working on instruments this old, I do have to do a lot of work on the neck tenon to make them seal. It also had extra and special engraving, which is really beautiful. Although King lacquer is, especially of this era, is very delicate. Now this instrument is in fantastic physical condition, but you can see it still has an awful lot of wear to the lacquer. And they engraved the key cups, the B flat, the B, the C sharp, the C, and the E flat. Now I've seen instruments where these were not engraved, but almost every single time on a Zephyr Special these will be engraved. Also something they were really proud of, and rightfully so, was the pearl touch pieces. You can see every place that you touch, except for the E flat and the C, has a pearl touch piece, which is really great. Pearl doesn't wear nearly as much as brass does, and a lot of times on instruments that have been played a lot, you can see that the brass next to the pearl has been worn down an awful lot, whereas the pearl has not. The downside of this is that mother of pearl that is this thick is very difficult to procure, and it's also very difficult to work. So if you have one of these that is damaged or broken, and pearl is a very brittle material, although it's tough and long wearing, it is brittle, meaning it can shatter quite easily, you are going to have an extremely difficult time finding replacements, if you can ever find them at all. It's very difficult to find the raw materials, and it's also very difficult to work. And you can see these little brass buttons in the middle. What that actually is the bottom of a screw. On the underside of these keys, not sure if you can see there, there is a little tiny flat-headed brass screw that holds these on. And when you are overhauling this, you can unscrew them, take these pearl pieces off, they're not glued on or anything, and just clean out the bottom where there tends to be corrosion kind of starting to gather green stuff between the pearl and the key itself. But like I said, pearl is very delicate, very brittle, so if you have a hard time moving that screw, just leave it alone. And if you're screwing it back in, don't screw it very tight. Threaded pearl is basically, it's like I don't know, threaded bread. It's if you do any more than like a very light tension, you're going to break the threads. And like I said, these are basically impossible to acquire again. You've also got pearl rollers, which are really nice. You want to make sure when you're buying one of these that all the rollers move freely. The rods inside, if they rust, they will expand against the rollers and break them, either when you try to unscrew them or just in place. And what you'll end up having to do is replace the rollers like I had to do on this instrument. I don't know if you can tell, hopefully not, that these are replacement rollers. And this is actual pearl. I had to work this to fit, which was not easy, but I think it came out really well and looks pretty much like everything else except a little newer. The tenor that we're looking at here is a 254,000 serial, which actually has something like super cool. Let me show it to you. So here is the original service card for that tenor from Volkwein's Music, which actually still exists. So this was sold in October 1942, which I think is super awesome. Apparently he never took it in for his inspection or cleanings. When I got this, it actually had original pads, and I overhauled it and sold it to a guy who had been looking for a Zephyr Special for a long time. And he actually had taken a Super 20, a really nice Super 20, as a consolation prize. And now that he's getting the Zephyr Special, is going to be getting rid of his Super 20, so if that tells you anything. Here is the original HN White, Taking Care of Your Instrument, little pamphlet. And if you're on HD, you should be able to pause this and just take a look at what it says here. So where was I? Yeah, this is 254,000, probably made in 1941, maybe early 42, and then sold in October 42. And this was in fantastic condition. I mean, it had the original pads that had barely been played, but as you can see, the lacquer wore anyways. Now, the lacquer on these instruments is not very durable, and if you see one that looks this good, you're doing pretty well. And on the neck, these were actually lacquered to begin with, and you can see a little tiny bit of the lacquer remains here. On the alto, I've got more of it remaining underneath the octave key here. If you see one of these instruments that has lacquer remaining on the neck, then you're really looking at one that's barely ever been played. Almost always the lacquer is going to be worn off the neck, and that's okay. And I prefer to leave the necks with a little bit of tarnish on them. If you try and polish these down, you'll make the silver shiny, but you're either going to remove the lacquer or you're going to make the edges of the lacquer by the silver like blacken with the stuff you're polishing off the silver. So just keep them clean, and since you're handling the neck so much, it won't tarnish much past this or that. Let's see. As far as this instrument in general, right? So we've talked about it relative to the Zephyr, but if you're looking at this instrument in general, what you're going to find is that you've got post construction, right? So you've got single posts affixing the keywork to the instrument, which is delicate relative to ribbed construction, where you've got a giant plate on the body with all the posts going into it. But if they get damaged, which they can, especially this low C sharp sticks out real far on these. A lot of times you'll see this gets knocked off, like on old Martins. It's relatively easy to solder back on. It also has brazed tone holes. Okay, so if you're looking at the tone holes there as they attach to the body, there are two basic ways to make tone holes. One is you pull them out of the body, so you cut a little oval in the body and then you pull the tone holes out. So the tone holes are actually a portion of the metal that the body was made of. Or you can attach tone holes, and you can attach them with soft solder, like on Martins, which tends to fail over time but is quite easy to repair. Or you can braze them, aka silver solder them to the body like you see on Kings, which lasts an awful long time, but if you have to repair them, it's quite difficult because you need to get the tone hole and surrounding area red hot before you can remove it. And that also means that you need to remove everything that is soft soldered nearby, remove that first, and you're going to torch a large portion of lacquer. But you barely ever have to replace these because they're quite durable and they don't break down over time like soft solder. And they also provide you with that nice, thick, hopefully you can see that there, pad seat on the tone holes because it's thicker metal than the body's made out of. So in my opinion, brazed tone holes are kind of the best of both worlds, but they are expensive to manufacture, which is why you don't really see them on saxophones anymore. And probably one of the reasons that King found it difficult to continue making high-quality saxophones, and they cheapened over time. But if you've got like major body damage near one of these, like if there's a big crease that goes through a tone hole, that can be difficult to repair, so be aware of that. Also, as I said, you've got nickel keywork, which is fairly durable, but also a little bit more difficult to repair than regular brass. The pearls, again, are something you want to watch out for. As far as overhauling the instrument itself, you've got this one huge long rod at the top for your upper stack, which means like when I press the G here, you've got a portion of hinge tube here, solid rod, another portion of hinge tube here, same for the bis. Getting this all in line so that it's perfectly free and light, but also has absolutely no movement or play in it, is something that can take a little while. But that is common to all saxophones that have this nice long rod at the top, which is usually pre-war saxophones with straight keywork. Modern saxophones take the bis and the G and put them on pivots by themselves. And since you've got the nickel key barrels, it just makes for rather challenging work to get it to be like this one is and be absolutely tight. So mechanical overhauls and instruments like this, I have to charge more, but they should last longer. Also, the octave mechanism, as you can see, is a fairly complex affair, and getting that to be quick, slick, and not noticeable for its complexity to the player is something that is rather difficult. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 springs acting all together and against each other in varying degrees and switching back and forth with the octave mechanism. Having those springs balanced, choosing your materials, making sure that there is absolutely no play in this mechanism will go a long way towards making this feel slick, but mostly you've just got to spend time on it. If you think you're going to get this octave mechanism set in an hour, you're wrong. It's going to be more like 2 to 3 hours, so keep that in mind when you're doing one of these octave mechanisms. And that doesn't even count the key fitting. I'm just talking about getting all of your materials right, seating your pads, and making everything work smoothly together. The key heights on these instruments you'll find are medium. If you see them in original condition, which this one was, and I've seen several others, the key heights are set to about here. So if you're looking at an instrument and wondering where to set the key heights, this is about what you're looking at a tenor. And this alto is a little more open than I would like to see. But the upper stack is about right. And the bell keys are about right. But the lower stack, that's a bit more open than it should be. Should be more, oops, like right about there is where you want those to be. And obviously use your ear, use intonation and tone to guide where you go with key heights. As far as intonation, these horns have, I think, very good intonation. It's not like a Yamaha. If you're expecting it to play for you, look elsewhere. But if you've got a decent ear and you are willing to trade perfect intonation out of the box for an awful lot of character and a beautiful tone, this is an instrument you should think about. Kings are not commonly thought of as having good intonation, but starting with the Zephyr Special, they really did. They're really not that troublesome, although they are fairly sensitive to key heights. So if your instrument is really out of tune, either probably you've got a mouthpiece that is a really small chamber, which doesn't usually agree with these depending on your personal physiology, or your key heights are incorrect. But when you get them all set up, everything plays very nicely. These also originally had fairly slim springs installed in them, so you'll find that if you like a very strong resistance in your springs, you may have to change the springs. You may even have to remount the spring holes. But when they're in good shape, it actually feels really, really nice to have light spring tension. They've got these really big, wide, slim pearls, and it just feels really good under the fingers to have it be light spring tension. It's very comfortable under the fingers. It's got inline keywork, as you can see. Both stacks are inline. They're not offset like modern instruments. The bell keys are a somewhat antiquated shape, but I find them to be very comfortable. If you get them set up right, they're very light. And I think it's actually far superior to the later Super 20 left-hand pinky table, which if you actually take time to look at the mechanics of the later Super 20s, it's just, I don't know, it seems like they were building on top of stuff and kind of making alterations rather than building it anew from whole cloth. Whereas with this instrument, they were really keeping it relatively simple and things work together very well. But if you look at the level of complexity and strangeness on the Super 20 left-hand pinky table, especially from a repairman's perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's quite difficult to get it feel as good as it should feel because of the decisions they made at the factory. Whereas the left-hand pinky table of the Zephyr Special, and also this is identical to the very early Super 20s, feels fine. And you'll even see on the back here, I don't know if you can tell, but they put pearl rollers on the back of the keys where they contact the touch piece arms from the left-hand pinky table. Let's see. I believe I already went over that the lacquer is fairly delicate. Let's see here. Oh yeah, the spring cradles for the flat springs, and you'll see these on later Super 20s as well. But what they've got, so they've got the flat spring coming down into this little cradle here, and let's see if I can hold it close enough that you can see. Okay, if you look at that D there, and you see where the spring is sitting, what that is a tiny piece of round steel that is inserted into this cradle where the spring is sliding. And in theory, that makes for a really great long-wearing spring connection because it's steel sliding on steel. But it's such a small round piece of steel that it can wear over time, and the flat spring keys can catch on the spring cradles that have been worn. And they can also wear little, like in the bottom of the flat spring, there can be like a little divot. And as it like rubs over its spring receiver, it'll be like really rough and then easy, and then really rough and then easy. And you can have sluggish palm keys or your side B flat or your G sharp because of those spring cradles. And you can pop them out, they're just press fit, and you can renew them if you need to. And you may also need to change your flat springs, or you can use a light abrasive to get rid of a very light divot in the flat springs. But if you've got sluggish feeling keys with flat springs, that's definitely something to keep in mind. I find that almost always they feel sluggish if you don't do a little bit of work to them. Yeah, so that is the King Zephyr Special. In my opinion, one of King's greatest saxophones, if not the greatest saxophone they made. And I do love the Super 20. I just think the King Zephyr Special is a little bit special. And one of the best saxophones made. Like I said, especially in alto, it's one of my top 3. And this one is now mine. I just need to overhaul it. So I hope you found this helpful, useful, informative. My name is Matt Stohrer. I repair saxophones for a living. If you've got any questions, comments, any requests, please feel free to get in touch. You can call me, you can email me, you can leave a comment here. And thank you for watching.